Well, welcome everyone, and great to hear Sue talk. And that's very much the bigger picture, very much bigger picture probably than what I'm going to be talking about. I'm sort of in the on the ground picture, as it were. So, but I think I'd like to mainly be talking about the systems, and I know Sue's talking about the biggest systems, in effect, changing big policy. But I'd like to talk about the systems that actually affect our work and affect, I think, people and planning in particular. And this slide, I use this slide quite a lot because ear protection is, it's systematic of the kind of systems that we've developed over the years that are the cheapest and the most convenient for budgets and for organizations, but they aren't really the systems that are the best for people. And if you maintain green space like we did on Clapton Park in Hackney for 18 years, this is what our contract insisted we wore. So we cut things, we trimmed things, and we poisoned things. And most of the time we had to have protection to do that. I'm suggesting that we take these things off, and in a wider sense, we start to listen to what to people that we're actually working for, listen to the people that what we're doing is affecting. And the ear protection seems to me like, if we take these things off when we're looking after housing estates, we can hear what the residents have got to say, and we can understand what needs to be done, because everything really, in theory, should be led by the people that you're working for. So we need to get these things off more often. And hopefully, what we did at Clapton Park when we rewrote the contract was to insist that these things aren't worn. It's a minimum amount of time. So these things come off, and then you garden and you talk to people and you listen to people. And this is what taking these things away does. So I'm going to skip through a few. I'm going to be optimistic to start with, and I'm going to say new landscapes. The potential of creating new places that are brilliant for people and wildlife are fantastic. And we think we've got to not underestimate that. We can really start to make amazing places for wildlife very quickly, but we need to do it creatively. We need to think about it, and we need to have a conversation in the planning and the systems early on. And we don't just have a knee-jerk reaction when these things turn up. So there's my optimism. Okay, so just going through, this is Clapton Park. This is where we looked after, and this is what happens when you take your ear protection off. So we talked to our Turkish residents on the estate, and we realised that grapevines, for instance, are very important for in their food culture, for dolma, and they are interested in the leaves, not the grapes, and the leaves. We planted grapevines up, loads of pieces of railing on the estate. One of the best things we've ever done, and people loved us for this. And that really only came on the back of us taking ear protection off and listening to what people want. So this is maintenance. This is maintenance. It's not cutting and trimming, because everyone can do that. It's all about listening to what people want and changing systems to suit these people. And what comes on the back of that, as soon as you listen to people, you've then got climbing plants, you've got food plants, you've got biodiversity on the back of listening to people. So I think we need to never forget this is what ultimately is our job in a therapy. And if we can call it caring for places rather than maintaining places, that would also be good. And we need to work together. So this is Jeff, one of our cleaners, great guy. And cleaners and green space maintenance guys obviously should have an interaction and a crossover, and that often doesn't happen. And again, that's systematic to a lot of siloed systems within our infrastructure. So, you know, Jeff can tell me when there's the maintenance that needs doing, and there's some green space that he's looking after, and I can tell him when there's some litter that needs picking up, and we can share stuff, and that's the way it needs to be. So we work together for the same cause. But the other thing, I just put this slide in briefly to mention, we've got to not have the arrogance to think that we know what's best for people. So this is a SUD scheme on our estate that was put in as a rewilding project, you know, and this shit is not fair on the people that live there. You know, this is not fair. You know, there's no good saying, oh, we've rewilded. No, you've just made this place outside someone's house look terrible. You haven't consulted them. You haven't done anything like that. So this is the kind of the bad end of we know what's best. Biodiversity takes precedent overall. This is not biodiversity in comparison to what it could have been either. But even so, it's appalling and should never happen. So we've got to avoid this very middle class, we know what's best for people stuff. And this is a classic example of it. And we need to rethink everything. So the systems that we use in the horticultural systems, which I'm supposedly involved in and supposed to know something about, we always insist on using topsoil, don't we? It's a gardening thing. We use topsoil everywhere. We need to think about where we use topsoil. As Dusty was intimating with brownfield, brownfields are incredibly diverse places. And that is because they're not just blanketed with topsoil and they're not all flat. They're places that we have kind of trashed and knocked around. Then, lo and behold, they become incredibly good for wildlife. So we need to learn from brownfield sites and integrate those ideas into new landscapes. And thankfully, we've been campaigning to the highways for a long while to do this, to try and not blanket every embankment with topsoil. And they miraculously have changed their policy in November last year. And now you have to justify using topsoil on embankments. So systems, every system I think we need to look at, you know, bird hides. So this is just a random one, but this just to show what should a bird hide be like? Yeah, I mean, we've built them for years and years, being intimidating, boring wooden structures that you creep in at your own kind of, you know, you worry when you go in these places, and they're quiet and they're creepy and they're all that. Well, they shouldn't be like that, because if twitchers want to watch birds, they've got plenty of time to do that. But we should be encouraging families and kids and all that they're the groups that are not using bird hides, and they're the groups that we need to get in. So we need to have bright, colourful, exciting bird hides, right? Birds don't get put off by bright colours because they stay still. It doesn't move, right? So you can make a bird hide in any colour. So it's a system thing. We need to relook at everything. And this is the interior of it. You know, it needs to be a place that people want to go in. It doesn't want to be an intimidating place. And we need to look at this, the kind of whole biodiversity thing, because I think there's an incredible emphasis on plants and soils, which is great for biodiversity, but there needs to be emphasis on structure. Wildlife needs structure, and the structure that they breed, they hibernate, and they basically shelter and they warm up in, all that is all to do with structure and not plants. And that has been missed. I think we've missed that in our system. So shopping trolleys in ponds, litter on embankments have turned out to be the most biodiverse places, right? Now, no one likes to see that, do they? But that's because our natural structural stuff has disappeared. So litter has become the new structural important habitat. So we need to think about that, certainly. And we need to think about squeezing in biodiversity into every piece of infrastructure. So they don't knock down superstores and make them into parks anymore, do they? The only place we can squeeze biodiversity generally is in infrastructure, within the infrastructure. Car parks, for instance. This is a car park that we've been working on recently. So this was a car park that was passed in 2020 for 150 cars without any planting or habitat. In 2020, they allowed this to happen. And this is still happening. We need to question everything. Every piece of infrastructure needs to have a conversation about biodiversity and people. And we need to give more car park spaces back to wildlife. So instead of a car park, okay, that's my alarm. I hope you enjoyed that. I'm realizing I'm running out of time, so I'm going to skip. Here's another system: community gardens. So nature reserves, and Dusty was talking about conservation as being, or conservationist as being a bad word, and I think he's absolutely right. We don't want to conserve things as they are all the time. You know what I mean? So we need, for instance, we should have community gardens in nature reserves. This is the sort of stuff we should see in nature reserves. This is what people love, and they are incredibly biodiverse places, right? It shouldn't be just this kind of stoical, you know, we've done it this way, we'll always do it this way attitude. We need people in places. Infrastructure, bike shelters, any piece of infrastructure you need biodiversity for. And we need to shift this emphasis on infrastructure. So we could always get money to build stuff, can't we? Like when we were on the housing estate, always got money to build we could always get money to build pergolas and everything. Like we could never get money to pay people to care for places. And there's no point building loads of new infrastructure if you don't have people to care for it properly. And we should shift the funding from 100% infrastructure into whatever you want to do. 50-50 would be a good split. People to care for it and infrastructure. We don't need more pergolas. We need more people to look after the places that we design. And that's a fundamental problem in our system, I think.
Okay, thank you so much, John. That was very insightful.
I don't know if that was my last slide. I think it was, obviously.
Oh, sorry.